Imagine this, you're huddled inside a smoky, dim cave, fire crackling, eyes watching you, but not for survival, for connection. Love, lust, jealousy, even betrayal, all existed tens of thousands of years ago. But how? What if prehistoric intimacy wasn't just survival-based mating? What if it was more human, more emotional than we ever imagined? This isn't your typical classroom history. This is raw, untamed, primal, and shockingly familiar. Imagine waking up tens of thousands of years ago. The air is cold, sharp. There's no house, no bed, no morning texts, just the flicker of firelight and the steady breathing of your small tribe huddled close for warmth. Among them, someone your instincts are drawn to not because of perfume, a dating app profile, or witty conversation, but because of scent, symmetry, strength, and survival. Long before love letters or poetry, intimacy wasn't an expression of romance, it was a biological necessity. But don't confuse necessity with lack of complexity. Prehistoric humans like us were wired for connection. The deep stare, the gentle touch, the shared food, these were early languages of affection. But here's the twist. Our ancestors didn't just mate for reproduction. Evidence from burial sites, cave art, and wear patterns on tools hint at emotional bonds, social rituals, and even heartbreak. It's not just about who got chosen, it's about why they were chosen. And the answers are surprisingly human. You might picture cavemen as brutish, emotionally disconnected beings, but early Homo sapiens and even Neanderthals displayed behavior that mirrors empathy, grief, and care. A healed injury meant someone looked after you. Carefully buried bodies meant someone mourned you. Shared food meant trust. In these early moments, intimacy started to take form, not just as a reproductive act, but as a glue that held small, fragile communities together. Relationships could mean survival, physically and emotionally. So, if you think modern dating is hard, imagine trying to impress someone when your only fashion choice is animal skin and your cologne is yesterday's hunt. Before filters, pick-up lines, or what are we texts, attraction in the prehistoric world was brutally honest. There was no pretending, no personas. You couldn't fake strength, health, or confidence because those were the very traits your survival depended on. And the truth is, attraction wasn't just about looks, it was about signals. Biologists call it sexual selection. But in the wild, it looked like this. Broad shoulders for hunting, wide hips for childbirth, clear skin as a sign of health. Every glance, every gesture was rooted in ancient instincts. You didn't swipe right, you sensed fertility, safety, or danger. You read someone's posture like a paragraph, their scars like a biography. But surprisingly, emotional signals mattered too. Those who cooperated, showed kindness, or protected others. They were attractive, because while brute strength got you the kill, compassion kept the tribe alive. Studies of hunter-gatherer societies show that empathy was often more valuable than aggression in forming long-term bonds. And there's something else, touch. In a world where language was still developing, touch was powerful. A shared hide for warmth, a comforting hand during illness, a gentle nudge around the fire, these weren't just accidental. They were the early threads of intimacy, trust, even love. Imagine two people sitting in the dark after a successful hunt. The fire crackles, their hands brush. No words, but everything is said. Connection wasn't just physical, it was intuitive, raw, and deeply human. Cave art from places like Chauvet and Lascaux hints at more than survival. Some figures seem to show closeness, tenderness. We can't say exactly what was happening, but the artists cared enough to immortalize those moments. That alone speaks volumes. In an age ruled by instinct, the earliest forms of intimacy weren't a luxury. They were how you chose who to risk your life for. Now here, where things get even more human and even more surprising. Intimacy in the prehistoric world wasn't just about reproduction. It was also about survival through connection. Long before marriage, rings, or written vows, early humans were forming bonds, deep, emotional ones, that often mattered more than blood ties. Anthropologists studying tribes like the Hadza in Tanzania or the Kung of the Kalahari have noticed something striking. Close bonds aren't always with direct kin. People form chosen alliances, trusted partnerships between two individuals, even if they're not related. These bonds help with food sharing, child-rearing, and emotional support. Now imagine this in the Paleolithic world. You've just come back from a long, dangerous hunt. You're exhausted, maybe injured. But someone, not your sibling, not your mate, someone you've chosen, sits beside you, offers you food, maybe tends to your wound. That is intimacy, and it's powerful. These bonds might have even formed the earliest versions of romantic love. Yes, love, not as we know it today, but as loyalty, mutual aid, shared grief, shared fire. Researchers believe that even without formal relationships, people paired off emotionally. They depended on each other, not just to survive, but to feel seen in a brutal world. And here's a deeper twist. Archaeological sites show evidence of careful burials, some with two individuals placed side by side. Sometimes they're holding hands. One famous site in Italy, dubbed the Lovers of Valdaro, features a young man and woman buried face to face, their limbs intertwined 6,000 years ago. Were they lovers? Was it symbolic? We may never know for sure, but one thing is clear: connection mattered deeply, maybe more than we ever imagined. These ancient bonds, these early whispers of love, loyalty, and care, laid the emotional foundation for everything human intimacy would one day become. Let's take a moment to strip everything down, not just clothing, but culture, laws, and modern expectations. In a world with no religion, no state, no wedding rings, how did early humans decide who could be with whom? Turns out, even in the wild, there were rules unspoken, instinctive, and shaped by environment, group size, and sheer survival. And the deeper we look, the more fascinating it gets. In small hunter-gatherer bands, typically around 25-40 people, everyone knew each other, and that meant intimacy wasn't just personal, it was political. Who paired with whom could shift alliances, cause tension, or strengthen bonds between families. So even without laws, people paid attention. Anthropologists suggest that mate selection followed certain patterns: age, strength, skills like hunting or gathering, and surprisingly, humor. Yes, humor. Tribes like the Kung value charm, storytelling, and playfulness when choosing partners. Because in a harsh world, laughter might just mean long-term survival. But here's the real twist. Women often had more autonomy in these early societies than we might think. Before agriculture shifted power into the hands of land-owning men, prehistoric women had freedom in choosing partners, and sometimes more than one. Polyamory wasn't taboo, it was practical. A woman might bond with one man emotionally, another physically, and yet another for protection or food. This fluid approach to relationships wasn't immoral, it was adaptive. Love, lust, and loyalty blended in ways we barely understand today. So when we imagine cavemen dragging women by the hair, let's pause. That image comes from cartoons, not science. In reality, prehistoric intimacy was more complex, more mutual, and more nuanced than we've been told. These weren't just primal urges. These were carefully navigated choices, shaped by survival, social harmony, and the deeply human need to connect. Today, relationships are often built on the concept of exclusivity. You're mine, I'm yours. But go back 30,000 years, and the emotional landscape looked very different. Jealousy, that familiar twist in the stomach, existed, sure, but it wasn't always tied to ownership. That's a modern invention, deeply tied to agriculture, property, and inheritance. Before land became a thing to pass down, there wasn't much incentive to control who slept with whom. Instead, many prehistoric societies practiced sexual sharing, openly or discreetly. Among the Hadza and the Mosuo, modern hunter-gatherer societies that reflect ancient patterns, multiple partners weren't uncommon, and no one kept score. Why? Because it strengthened group cohesion. If everyone shared everything, food, shelter, even intimacy, the tribe functioned as a single unit. No one was left out. Even fatherhood was shared. A child was his or hers. It was ours. And in that system, The idea of exclusive possession of a partner simply didn't hold the same weight. Of course, emotions still existed. People still loved, bonded, and formed deep attachments. But instead of isolating couples, intimacy often wove people together. A woman might form strong emotional ties with multiple men, and vice versa, each relationship serving a unique purpose: comfort, protection, play, survival. Now imagine what this meant for things like heartbreak or betrayal. They existed, but in different forms. Less about cheating, more about being left out, being forgotten, losing your place in the emotional web of the tribe. What's wild is that modern research suggests many of us still carry echoes of that design. Studies show humans may be naturally inclined toward emotional polyamory, the ability to care for multiple people at once. But society taught us to suppress that, to follow the script. Prehistoric humans didn't have that script. They were writing it from scratch. And the way they handled intimacy wasn't chaos. It was flexible, fluid, and deeply in tune with human psychology, long before psychology had a name. Even without organized religion or written law, prehistoric societies weren't living in wild, ruleless intimacy. In fact, what held everything together wasn't strict policing, it was ritual and story. From cave paintings to stone figurines, our ancestors left behind more than tools, they left symbols. Take the famous Venus figurines, rounded, feminine, and exaggerated. These weren't just fertility idols, they were cultural anchors, objects of reverence, possibly even used in rituals tied to sexuality, birth, or womanhood. And while we can't read prehistoric myths the way we read books today, we know oral storytelling was a key part of life. Myths weren't entertainment, they were guides. They explained why the moon bled during menstruation, why Barbies came after storms, why sex was sacred or dangerous. These stories shaped behaviors. If a tale warned of spirits punishing selfish lovers, it wasn't about horror, it was social control. Subtle, psychological rules etched into the tribe's collective memory. Then there were the unspoken codes. You didn't need a law to know certain acts crossed the line. Maybe it was sleeping with someone during a mourning period, or touching a person marked by symbolic paint. These weren't universal. Each tribe had its own language of symbols and taboos. What's fascinating is how inclusive these systems were. Many early cultures acknowledged third genders, flexible identities, and roles outside male-female binaries. Sexual expression wasn't boxed in, it was contextual, based on age, status, season, or even the phase of the moon. There were no dating apps, no talking stages, but there were dances, initiations, and ceremonies. Sex wasn't casual, it was communal, it was sometimes sacred, sometimes celebratory, always meaningful. And through it all, these humans, who we often reduce to grunting cave dwellers, were navigating intimacy with nuance, creativity, and surprising emotional intelligence. They may not have had marriage certificates, but they had something else: ritualized connection, a living, breathing system built to honor one of the most powerful human forces. Jealousy existed, so did heartbreak, but so did forgiveness and fierce, irrational loyalty. Just like today, love was both a risk and a rebellion. The story of prehistoric intimacy isn't just about who slept with whom. It's about the quiet revolution that intimacy sparked. The first real steps toward empathy, commitment, and what we now call love. In the end, our ancestors weren't just surviving. They were feeling. Prehistoric intimacy wasn't just about sex or survival. It was about connection, quiet gestures, loyalty, care, and emotional bonds that laid the foundation for everything we call love today. Our ancestors didn't just pass down genes. They passed down the need to feel close, to be seen, and to belong. If this glimpse into ancient emotions made you rethink human nature, imagine what else we've forgotten. Subscribe for more stories that dig deeper into history, humanity, and the heart. Let's keep exploring the past to understand ourselves better.